Your soulmate was deeply moved after learning this about you. Then something you did left them embarrassed in front of everyone. Discover what you did. My beloved child, something happened when your soulmate finally learned a truth about you that no one had ever explained to them before. And what they discovered did not simply surprise them, it completely changed the way they looked at you. For a long time, they had wondered why you sometimes stayed quiet when you could have defended yourself, why you gave people another chance when walking away would have been easier, and why you kept moving forward without telling everyone how difficult certain moments had been for you. Then one conversation revealed the missing piece. Someone who understood more about your story finally told them what you had quietly carried while still showing kindness to others. Your soulmate stopped speaking. They had expected an ordinary explanation, but instead they discovered a side of you that made several memories suddenly make sense. That moment stayed with them because they realized they had misunderstood some of your strongest qualities. But don't skip, because what happened afterward is the part nobody expected. Your soulmate was still processing everything they had learned when something connected directly to you happened in front of other people. And suddenly, all eyes turned toward them. Here is where the story takes an unexpected turn. Your soulmate had been trying to act completely normal, pretending that what they had learned about you had not affected them deeply. But people around them could already tell something had shifted. Every time your name came up, their expression changed. Every time someone mentioned a memory connected to you, they became unusually quiet. Then someone brought up something you had recently done. Something you probably considered small and completely ordinary. Your soulmate immediately knew exactly what they were talking about. And that was the moment their calm appearance disappeared. Stay till the end, because the reason they became embarrassed was not what anyone expected. You had unknowingly done something that showed how carefully you remembered a detail about them, a detail they had once mentioned casually and assumed you had forgotten. When the people around them discovered that you remembered it, someone looked directly at your soulmate and asked a simple question: why would someone remember something that small unless you truly mattered to them? Your soulmate had no prepared answer. Everyone noticed the silence. Someone smiled. Another person looked at them as though they had just figured out a secret your soulmate had been trying very hard to keep hidden. But the biggest revelation was still waiting. Your soulmate's embarrassment was not because you had done anything wrong. It came from realizing, in front of everyone, that your simple action had revealed something they were not ready to admit aloud: they had been paying attention to you just as closely. Suddenly, the conversation shifted. Someone remembered another moment involving you. Then another detail surfaced. Piece by piece, the people around your soulmate began noticing a pattern that your soulmate could no longer casually explain away. Something huge is waiting for you, because one person in that room finally said what everyone else had started thinking, and those words completely changed the atmosphere. Your soulmate looked away, hoping the conversation would move on, but it didn't. The same person asked them one question about you that they could not answer without revealing what had truly been happening inside their heart. And just when your soulmate thought the moment could not become more surprising, someone mentioned something you had done weeks earlier, something even you may not realize was noticed. That tiny moment became the final clue. Don't skip what comes next, because the answer your soulmate finally gave after hearing your name may explain why learning the truth about you affected them so deeply in the first place. What happened next made the entire room suddenly feel different. Your soulmate had been hoping the conversation would quietly disappear, but instead, one person leaned closer and asked, "If this person means nothing unusual to you, why do you remember everything about them?" That question landed harder than anyone expected. Your soulmate tried to laugh it away, but their expression gave them away before their words could. Because they remembered things about you that nobody in that room even knew, the way you react when something genuinely matters to you, the little details you mention once and never repeat, and even the moments when you pretend something doesn't affect you. Don't skip, because this was exactly when your soulmate realized the conversation was no longer about what you had done. It was about what their reaction to you was revealing. Someone then mentioned your thoughtful gesture again, and suddenly everyone understood why your soulmate had become so embarrassed. You had remembered something important to them without asking for recognition, without making a big scene, and without expecting anything back. And after learning what you had quietly been through yourself, that simple gesture affected them twice as deeply. Then came the detail that completely changed the meaning of everything. Your soulmate admitted that when they first heard about what you had been through, they went back through old memories of you in their mind. Certain conversations suddenly sounded different. Certain moments they once considered ordinary now carried another meaning. They remembered occasions when you could have made everything about yourself, but didn't. They remembered how you noticed other people even when nobody seemed to notice you. And suddenly your recent action made perfect sense. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you. One person looked at your soulmate and said something they were completely unprepared to hear. Maybe that person understands you better than you realize. Your soulmate froze. Not because the statement was embarrassing by itself, but because somewhere inside, they already believed it. And now that truth had been spoken aloud in front of everyone. But there was still one mystery nobody could explain. Why had you remembered that particular detail about your soulmate when so much time had passed? The answer became even more surprising when someone revealed that your gesture had not been random at all. Apparently, there had been one brief conversation between you and your soulmate that they assumed you had forgotten completely. Your soulmate had mentioned a small hope, almost casually, and moved on. But you remembered. And when an opportunity appeared, you quietly did something connected to that exact memory. That was why your soulmate became embarrassed in front of everyone. Suddenly everyone could see that there was a deeper level of attention between the two of you than either side had openly acknowledged. But don't skip now, because another person remembered something your soulmate had done for you long before this happened. Suddenly the attention shifted back toward them. The room became quiet again. Your soulmate realized they had unknowingly done almost the exact same thing for you, remembering one tiny detail you had mentioned and acting on it later. Nobody had connected those two moments until now. And once they did, one unbelievable question remained hanging in the air. If both of you had been quietly remembering the smallest things about each other, what exactly had both of you been refusing to say? The silence that followed that question revealed more than any answer could have. Your soulmate looked around the room and suddenly understood that everyone had noticed the same pattern. This was no longer one coincidence, one thoughtful gesture, or one emotional reaction. There had been too many little moments connecting back to you. And then someone brought up the one memory your soulmate desperately hoped nobody would mention. It happened weeks earlier, during an ordinary conversation when your name unexpectedly came up. Your soulmate had immediately corrected someone who misunderstood something about you. They remembered exactly what you had said, explained what you probably meant, and defended your intentions with surprising certainty. At the time, nobody questioned it. But now someone asked, how did you know them well enough to explain that? Your soulmate had no easy answer. Don't skip, because what they finally admitted changed the entire direction of the conversation. They quietly said, because I notice more about them than they probably realize. And for a moment, nobody said anything. Your soulmate had accidentally spoken the truth they had been carefully hiding behind casual words. But the biggest surprise came immediately afterward. Someone asked when they had first started noticing you differently, and your soulmate's answer was not connected to your appearance, your success, or anything obvious. It went back to one moment when they saw you do something kind when you believed nobody important was watching. You received no praise for it. You didn't announce it. You simply helped someone, moved on, and probably forgot the moment ever happened. Your soulmate didn't forget. After later learning more about what you had personally experienced, that memory became even more powerful because they realized something extraordinary. You had reasons to become distant, yet you had chosen not to let difficult chapters decide the kind of person you would become. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate then admitted that this was the moment their curiosity about you became something much harder to ignore. They started listening more carefully whenever you spoke. They remembered details. They noticed when your energy changed. And suddenly everyone understood why your recent gesture had embarrassed them so much. It proved you might have been noticing them too. Then one person asked the question your soulmate could no longer escape. Do you think they know how much you care? Your soulmate paused longer than anyone expected. Their answer was quiet, I don't think they know the half of it. That sentence changed everything. But don't skip, because there was still another revelation waiting. Your soulmate confessed that they had almost told you something important before, more than once, but every time the moment arrived, they changed the subject. Not because they had nothing to say, but because they had too much to say and didn't know where to begin. And now, after what happened in front of everyone, hiding behind silence suddenly felt impossible. Someone finally told them, then stop expecting them to read your mind. Your soulmate smiled nervously, looked down, and admitted something nobody expected. They had already been thinking about exactly how they would start that conversation with you. But there was one sentence they wanted to say first, and when the people around them heard what that sentence was, even the teasing stopped. Because those words revealed that your soulmate wasn't only thinking about what happened between you before. They were thinking about what could happen next. And then your soulmate finally revealed the sentence they had been holding back, I wish I had understood them sooner. The room went completely quiet, because suddenly everyone realized this was deeper than embarrassment. Your soulmate wasn't embarrassed by you. They were embarrassed by how obvious their feelings had become before they were ready to explain them. Learning the truth about what you had quietly carried had changed something inside them, but your thoughtful action afterward made that change impossible to hide. Don't skip, because the next confession surprised even the person who knew your soulmate best. They admitted there were moments when they had mistaken your silence for distance. Moments when they wondered whether you simply didn't care. But after discovering what had really been happening beneath the surface, they began replaying those memories differently. Suddenly your patience looked different. Your restraint looked different. Even the way you remembered that tiny detail about them carried a completely new meaning. And then someone asked, "So what would you say if they were standing here right now?" Your soulmate looked down for a second, smiled, and gave an answer nobody in that room expected. They said they wouldn't begin with some dramatic speech. They would begin with a question: "Why didn't you ever tell me how much you were carrying?" That answer revealed exactly what had moved them so deeply. They weren't looking at you with pity. They were looking at you with a new level of respect because they finally understood that some of your strongest moments happened when nobody was applauding. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you. Your soulmate then admitted that your recent gesture made them realize something else. They had spent so much time wondering whether you noticed them that they completely missed the evidence sitting right in front of them. You remembered. You listened. You paid attention. And somehow, without making any grand announcement, you had answered a question they had secretly carried for longer than anyone knew. But just when the conversation seemed to have reached its biggest revelation, someone across the room said, "Wait, there's something else they did that you don't know about." Your soulmate immediately looked up. What came next completely shifted the atmosphere again. Apparently, your soulmate had only heard half the story about your gesture. There was another detail, something you had done before anyone else became involved, and once your soulmate heard it, their embarrassment disappeared and was replaced by pure disbelief. Don't skip now. The missing detail proved that your action wasn't spontaneous. You had remembered that small thing about them much earlier than anyone realized. You had quietly prepared for the right moment without knowing whether they would ever discover it. That meant there had been no audience to impress and no recognition to chase. Your soulmate sat there processing that truth while everyone watched their expression change. Then someone asked one final question: "Now that you know all of this, what are you going to do?" Your soulmate didn't laugh this time. They didn't avoid the question. They simply said, "I think I've waited long enough." But something huge is waiting for you, because what they decided to do next wasn't what anyone predicted, and before they could follow through, one unexpected piece of information about you reached them that changed their entire plan. Just when your soulmate believed they finally knew what to do, that unexpected information made them stop completely. It wasn't something negative about you. In fact, it was the exact opposite. They learned that long before they understood how deeply you noticed them, you had once been given an opportunity to speak about them when they weren't there, and what you chose to say left a lasting impression on the person listening. You could have exaggerated. You could have shared private details. You could have made yourself look important. Instead, you protected something personal about your soulmate and simply said, "That isn't my story to tell." When those words were repeated to them, your soulmate became completely still. Don't skip, because this was the missing piece. Suddenly, your thoughtful gesture in front of everyone wasn't the thing affecting them most anymore. It was discovering what you had done when there was absolutely no chance of receiving credit for it. You had respected them when they weren't watching. And after everything your soulmate had already learned about you, this new revelation hit differently. They looked around the room and realized the person who had embarrassed them by remembering one tiny detail was also the person who had quietly protected their trust when nobody would have known otherwise. That realization changed the conversation instantly. The teasing stopped. The smiles became quieter. Even the people who had been asking playful questions understood that something meaningful had just been uncovered. Your soulmate admitted that they had spent too much time searching for obvious signs while ignoring the smaller ones that mattered more. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you. They started listing moments they remembered, a time you changed the subject when someone tried to pull you into unnecessary gossip, a moment you gave them space instead of demanding an explanation, and another occasion when you remembered something they had mentioned only once. Individually, those moments seemed ordinary. Together, they told a completely different story. Your soulmate suddenly understood why learning about your past had moved them so deeply. The person they had been trying to understand was never hiding emptiness behind silence. There was depth there. There was thoughtfulness. There were things you chose not to announce. And then your soulmate said something that surprised everyone. Maybe I've been waiting for proof when the proof has been there the entire time. But don't skip now, because the next moment became the turning point. Someone asked your soulmate what they were afraid would happen if they finally spoke openly to you. For several seconds, they said nothing. Then they admitted the truth: they weren't afraid of talking to you. They were afraid that they had waited so long that you might no longer believe what they had to say. That was when someone reminded them of your gesture, the very thing that had embarrassed them earlier. Someone who remembers something that small hasn't forgotten everything, they said. Your soulmate looked up immediately. Those words seemed to unlock something. The hesitation that had followed them through the entire conversation suddenly began disappearing. They reached for their phone, then stopped. Not because they changed their mind, but because they realized the first thing they wanted to tell you couldn't be reduced to a casual sentence. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate made a completely different decision in that moment. They decided that when they finally spoke, they would tell you exactly what they had learned about you, exactly why your action had affected them, and exactly what everyone had noticed before they were willing to admit it themselves. But before that conversation could happen, one person gave your soulmate a final piece of advice, and those few words changed what they planned to reveal to you first. That final piece of advice was simple, but it reached your soulmate more deeply than everything else they had heard. Don't tell them what everyone noticed. Tell them what you noticed. Your soulmate went quiet again. Because suddenly they understood that this conversation with you couldn't be built around other people's opinions. It had to begin with the moments they had personally carried in silence. The first time they realized your kindness wasn't an act, the moment they noticed you remembered details others overlooked, and the day they understood that your quiet nature sometimes held more meaning than 100 explanations. Don't skip, because your soulmate then revealed something nobody in that room knew. There had been one particular moment when they almost approached you and told you everything. You were nearby. The opportunity was perfect. They had even rehearsed the opening sentence in their mind. But then you did something completely unexpected. You smiled, said something ordinary, and continued on your way without realizing how nervous they had become. You're so. The old conversation suddenly sounded completely different when your soulmate replayed it in their mind. At the time, you had said something simple, something about how the smallest actions often reveal what words cannot. Your soulmate had smiled, answered casually, and moved on. But now those words returned with incredible weight. Because everything that happened afterward seemed to point back to that exact idea. You remembered something important to them. You protected their trust when they weren't around. You noticed details without asking for recognition. And somehow, your actions had been speaking long before either of you found the right words. Don't skip, because your soulmate suddenly remembered what happened immediately after that old conversation. They had watched you walk away and almost called you back. Almost. Something inside them had wanted to ask what you really meant, but they convinced themselves they were reading too much into it. Now, surrounded by people who had independently noticed the same connection, your soulmate realized they might have misunderstood one of the most important moments between you. But then someone challenged them with a question that changed everything again. What if those words weren't about you? Your soulmate stopped. For the first time that evening, they had to separate hope from certainty. And that mattered, because they didn't want to invent a meaning you had never intended. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you, because instead of making assumptions, your soulmate said something surprisingly clear. Then I'll ask. I'd rather know their truth than create my own version of it. That sentence revealed how much the entire experience had changed them. Earlier, they were embarrassed because everyone could see how much they cared. Now they weren't trying to hide it. They simply wanted honesty. They wanted to understand what your gesture meant to you. They wanted to tell you why learning more about your story had moved them. Most importantly, they wanted you to know that the quiet parts of you had been noticed. Not perfectly. Not always at the right time. But noticed. And then came the revelation that brought the entire story full circle. The person who originally told your soulmate about your thoughtful gesture admitted one final detail. You had specifically asked them not to make a big deal about it. You never expected everyone to find out. You never intended to put your soulmate on the spot. The embarrassment that followed had been completely accidental. When your soulmate heard that, they laughed softly and shook their head, because suddenly everything made sense. Don't skip this final turn. What embarrassed them in front of everyone was never your action. It was their own reaction exposing how much the action meant to them. They had tried so hard to appear unaffected that the moment they realized you remembered them, everyone saw straight through the disguise. And now your soulmate had one choice left: continue pretending nothing had changed, or finally have the conversation they had postponed again and again. This time, they chose the conversation. Not because anyone pressured them. Not because the room teased them. But because learning the truth about you had made them understand something they could no longer ignore. Sometimes the most important connection isn't revealed through one enormous moment. Sometimes it has been quietly revealing itself through 100 tiny ones, and your soulmate had finally started putting those moments together. But the moment your soulmate decided to stop hiding behind uncertainty, another memory surfaced, one they had never told anyone about. It happened on a day when you probably thought nothing important had occurred. Your soulmate had been unusually quiet, carrying something on their mind, and almost everyone around them continued as normal. You didn't. You noticed the change without demanding an explanation. You simply gave them a few thoughtful words and allowed them space. At the time, your soulmate acted as though it was nothing. But they remembered it afterward. They remembered it much longer than you would ever guess. Don't skip, because this was when they finally understood why learning more about you had affected them so deeply. You had been paying attention to people while carrying your own untold chapters. And suddenly your soulmate began wondering how many times you had quietly understood them while they were still trying to understand you. That question hit differently now. Because the embarrassing moment in front of everyone had exposed a truth they could no longer dismiss, your smallest actions mattered to them far more than they had admitted. Then your soulmate revealed why they had hesitated for so long. It wasn't because they had nothing meaningful to say. It was because every time they imagined speaking openly, they worried they might misunderstand your kindness. What if you remembered those little details simply because that was the kind of person you were? What if they turned something genuine and simple into something it was never meant to be? Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you. Instead of letting that uncertainty stop them again, your soulmate finally realized there was only one respectful way forward: ask you, listen to your answer, and stop allowing assumptions to write the story. And that realization changed their entire approach. They no longer wanted to arrive with conclusions about what you felt. They wanted to arrive with honesty about what they had felt. They wanted to tell you that learning your story made them see your strength differently. They wanted to admit that your thoughtful gesture had caught them completely off guard. And yes, they wanted to tell you why everyone saw them become so embarrassed. The instant your name was connected to that gesture, their expression revealed how deeply it mattered. But one final detail made your soulmate smile before that conversation could even begin. Someone asked them what they remembered most clearly about you. Your soulmate could have chosen any dramatic moment, yet they chose something incredibly small, one ordinary sentence you once said while everyone else was distracted. They repeated it almost word for word. The room immediately became quiet again, because everyone recognized the irony. Your soulmate had spent the entire evening being surprised that you remembered one tiny detail about them, while they had been carrying tiny details about you for much longer. Don't skip now, because this was the realization that finally removed their embarrassment. There was nothing humiliating about caring enough to remember. There was nothing strange about being moved by someone's kindness. And there was no reason to pretend the connection meant less to them than it actually did. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate finally knew the first thing they wanted to say when the two of you spoke. It wasn't a dramatic declaration. It was a simple truth: I think there are things about you I should have understood much sooner. And behind that sentence was everything: the discovery, the embarrassment, the memories, and one question they had waited far too long to ask. Part 9. And that question was far more personal than anyone expected. How long have you been noticing the things I thought nobody noticed? Your soulmate had carried that question silently because your gesture forced them to reconsider every small moment between you. Maybe the connection had never depended on one grand event. Maybe it had been building through tiny details neither of you openly discussed. Don't skip, because while your soulmate was thinking about this, someone reminded them of another forgotten moment. There had been a conversation where everyone was talking at once, yet when your soulmate mentioned something important to them, you were the only person who remembered it later. Your soulmate had dismissed it as coincidence. Now they couldn't. They started connecting that memory to the gesture that embarrassed them in front of everyone, and suddenly their expression changed again. They weren't trying to convince themselves that they knew what you felt. They simply realized they had never given themselves permission to ask. And after learning what you had quietly carried in your own life, they understood something else. Perhaps your silence had never meant indifference. Perhaps there were parts of your story they had judged before they fully understood them. Then someone asked your soulmate to imagine one thing. What if you had misunderstood their silence in exactly the same way? That possibility stopped them completely. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you. Your soulmate suddenly remembered all the times they wanted to say more but chose safer words instead. The times they noticed you enter a room but deliberately acted normal. The moments they remembered something you said but pretended they had forgotten. And especially the times they wanted to ask whether you were okay but worried the question would reveal how closely they had been paying attention. Now the irony was impossible to ignore. They had spent so long wondering why you didn't make things clearer while doing exactly the same thing themselves. That realization brought another embarrassed smile, but this time they didn't look away. They admitted it openly. Maybe I've been waiting for courage from them while hiding mine. Nobody laughed. That sentence was too sincere. Because everyone understood that your soulmate had finally reached the point where pretending was harder than speaking. But don't skip the next part, because one last discovery completely changed what your soulmate planned to ask you first. Someone revealed that after you made that thoughtful gesture, you had apparently wondered whether it was too much. You had worried that remembering such a specific detail might make things awkward. When your soulmate heard this, they couldn't believe it. The exact action that had left them embarrassed had apparently made you uncertain too. For the first time, they saw the situation from both sides, two people noticing more than they admitted, both wondering whether the other person understood. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate no longer wanted the first conversation to be about explaining the embarrassment. They wanted to remove the uncertainty behind it. They wanted to tell you that your gesture wasn't too much. It mattered because it felt genuine. And then they decided on the question that would finally open the door neither of you had dared to touch. When you remembered that little thing about me, what made you hold on to it? Your answer could change everything, but your soulmate already knew there was something they needed to tell you before you answered.